So Republican presidential candidates are hitting the campaign trail in South Carolina. Former Governor Nikki Haley and Senator Tim Scott will hold separate events in their home state today. Scott has 4 planned stops, while Haley will host a town hall. Now, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis was also supposed to visit South Carolina today, but canceled the trip due to the deadly and racially motivated shooting in Jacksonville, as well as the tropical storm that's expected to make landfall in his home state of Florida later this week. Joining us now from South Carolina is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale. Also with us, co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader. Ali, let's start with you in the Palmetto State there. Give us a sense as to what we'll hear from these two candidates. There's a sense among most Republicans that Nikki Haley did quite well for herself in that debate last week, while Tim Scott made less of an impression. What are you looking for today?
Yeah, Jonathan, I think that's the right view coming out of last week's debate. And it's why both of these South Carolina natives are coming back to their home state with really opposite goals. For Haley, it's to try to continue riding that wave of momentum that she built last Wednesday on the debate stage in Milwaukee. And for Senator Tim Scott, it's to try to walk the walk of what his advisors were saying behind the scenes, which is that Wednesday night's debate was no big deal effectively for them. It wasn't a make or break moment, in the words of one senior advisor. And for Scott, he's just trying to continue out here on the campaign trail, getting as many events in as he can, frankly, before he gets hunkered down in D.C. for September, what's likely to be an aggressive funding battle in the House and the Senate, and as we're likely barreling towards a government shutdown. So that's going to make it a little bit harder for Senator Scott to stay out on the campaign trail at a consistent clip. It's why we're watching him try to bank so many events now and potentially next week in these critical states. But for someone like former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, what Wednesday night's Milwaukee debate showed was that she could be the adult in the room, leveraging the fact that she has deep executive experience as a 2-term governor of this state, but also foreign policy experience as a former UN ambassador. Those, of course, were key moments for her. But I think the other thing that we're watching her do coming out of the debate is try to be the adult voice in the room on abortion access. This is an issue that we've talked about a lot. I know we were talking about this on the show last week. We will continue talking about it because reproductive rights has been such a galvanizing issue at the ballot box for abortion advocates. It's really cut against Republicans. And it's the thing that I hear from Republican sources consistently, that these Republican candidates will get pushed to the right and boxed in on restrictive abortion policy. And then they're going to have to figure out a way to campaign on that in a general where they are squarely out of step with the American public. For someone like Nikki Haley, she's sort of trying to have it both ways by saying that there's, on a process perspective, no way for them to do any kind of abortion ban on a national federal level because they don't have the numbers in the House and Senate and haven't had them in decades. She's right, but she's also using that as an opportunity to get out of the conversation that many of us are asking these candidates about, which is where is the right week mark for them? For people like Pence, he says at least 15. For people like DeSantis, I think it's fair to assume that he's at 6 weeks because that's what he signed in Florida, though he's dodged on that question. For Haley, she's really trying to play it both ways by saying to the base that she's pro-life, which of course she is, but then by trying to speak to a general election audience by saying that whatever Republicans are saying about a national abortion ban can't actually get done because they lack the numbers. Nevertheless, I think a lot of us are still going to keep trying to press her on where the right week mark is. But I do think it's a fascinating dynamic for the only woman on the stage to be taking on this role where Republican women, and Lauren knows this, typically eschew gender and identity politics altogether.
Yeah, and certainly that's what we heard from her on the stage last week. But one of her go-to tactics on the campaign trail has been not to go after President Biden, but instead to attack his vice president, Kamala Harris. Let's take a listen.
And my concern is we cannot have Kamala Harris as president. We can't chance this. Kamala continues to mess up everywhere that she can. The one job that she's been given has been the border. She refuses to go there, so she gives us these word salads on things that just don't make sense, and she continues to sound extreme.
On Biden and Harris's watch, this woke self-loathing has swept our country. It's in the classroom, the boardroom, and the back rooms of government. We're told our country is flawed, rotten, and full of hate. Joe and Kamala even say that America's racist.
I've actually been to the border, and I didn't pull a Kamala go and come back. I went 400 miles down that border.
So, Lauren, a lot of Republicans are sort of subtly making this argument. It's invoking President Biden's age, suggesting that really this next election is about his vice president, Kamala Harris. You'd be putting her in charge. But Haley has been doing this by far the most explicitly. What is your read of this strategy?
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. She's certainly trying to play on the low approval ratings, which we've talked about on the show before, that Kamala continues to deal with, which is that she has had these sort of historically low approval ratings relative to other vice presidents. And I think Haley is banking on the fact that Kamala, just her name is so galvanizing for folks on the right. They loathe her, and that is going to be a winning strategy. I do think there's a lot of irony there. And then some of what Ali was getting to before is that on the one hand, Nikki Haley is willing to invoke her gender. She did it. It was one of her first sort of comments on the debate stage, right, invoking Margaret Thatcher, that if you want something done right, ask a woman. And then on the other hand, sort of playing on this idea that Kamala is somehow secretly the shadow president, which is also sort of disinformation and has some gendered tropes there too. And so in a way, she's trying to get it both ways. And I think that's what Ali's been pointing out really consistently also about her abortion stance. It's a really difficult path in a sense for Nikki Haley. She's operating and running in a party that is overwhelmingly male, that has a history of, lots of sexist attacks, et cetera, but also trying to appeal to the Republican women who will be vital in the election and are certainly vital primary voters, while also playing down her gender and playing up her gender, and also lobbing gendered attacks against the first woman vice president. It's not a simple knot to untangle.
I also think that it is a very cynical play to try and play on the fact that she's trying to imply that President Biden will not be there for his whole 4 years if he's reelected, which I think is very cynical to suggest. She's also playing to certain elements of the Republican Party on race. That you're talking about President Harris, who is she, a black woman and a woman, and I think for Nikki Haley herself, being a woman of color, I think is very cynical on all ends, that she's making some implicit appeals to some biases that I feel she has to be intelligent enough to know what she's playing into. Lauren.
I think this has always been a really complicated line for Republicans of color. And I think you see Tim Scott on these issues too, where, he has obviously, talks about his childhood and his race, but yet, completely doubles down in the other direction, which is that he has never been a victim of racism, that he doesn't experience those things, that the country is not racist, et cetera. And I think you see Nikki Haley trying to do some of the same thing. On the one hand, playing her gender, focusing on trying to connect with Republican women, who do need a home in a sense. And I think that's not the wrong calculus. We've had mostly Republican male candidates just completely overlook women's issues. As we talked about, the abortion stuff, I think, is leaving them at odds with a growing number of Republican women. And it's a really tight line and a complicated act. And I think people are calling it out because it's really difficult.
And this White House and the president's reelection campaign, they know that this time around the vice president will be far more central to this election than in 2020. Co-founder and CEO of All In Together, Lauren Leader, thank you so much. And NBC's Ali Vitale there for us in South Carolina. Thank you as well.